Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Osheta Moore, author of Shalom Sistas, Living Wholeheartedly in a Broken-Hearted World. Osheta, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Shalom with you, Eric.
Well, we're delighted to have you on the program. It is just a pleasure to cover this book and to tell people about your ministry and who you are. You are a Los Angeles writer and podcaster, as well as a wife to an urban pastor, mother of three,
Yes.
an economic justice advocate for women in developing countries. You have consistently been a voice for peacemaking, justice, and racial reconciliation. Your work's been featured on numerous websites and blogs, including Sojourners, She Loves Magazine, A Deeper Story, The Art of Simple, Renew, and Rachel Held Evans' blog. You can connect with her at shalominthecity.com. Well, you're not from Los Angeles, are you?
I'm not. I'm originally from Southeast Texas. So actually, my heart is really tender right now for all of my friends and family who is dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey, because my hometown, Texas City, Texas, is about 45 minutes south of Houston. Thankfully, my hometown was okay, but I know a lot of people who are suffering. So yeah, I'm a Texan girl.
You're a Texas girl, and you're
Yeah.
out now in Los Angeles?
We're living in Los Angeles for right now. Yeah. So
Good. I spent 7 years in Los Angeles.
no, actually, we've been in LA for a little over 2.5. We were in Boston for about 9 years, and in New Orleans before that. So I've been all around the country.
You've been all around, and now your husband is
Yeah.
an urban pastor. What does that mean?
So, well, this is actually interesting because we are actually accepting a new call in another urban neighborhood. And so to be an urban pastor means that you are pastoring in a community that is planted right in the midst of the urban core. So the church where my husband, the church that he was the associate pastor at here in Los Angeles, was 3 blocks from Skid Row. And so we really had a heart for having a community that's really diverse, that is a safe space for people of different walks of life to come into. And we found that being in the urban core where there's a lot of brokenness has been a way for us to be a part of that community. So when we think about urban, we're thinking about low income communities, under-resourced communities, or under-resourced people groups. And so in this instance, we served a third of our church were homeless people off of Skid Row.
How interesting. Now, are you finding that, and we've actually had people who have ministered to the homeless, whose passion is the homeless, and they're finding that our perceptions of homelessness are ill-founded.
Yeah.
We don't know the circumstances. They're
Yeah.
not all drug addicts. They're not all alcoholics.
Yeah.
This is a circumstance, of opportunity or loss of opportunity that have contributed to life-changing circumstances.
Yeah, one of the things that I was most surprised with, because my husband and I met doing urban work in New Orleans during Mardi Gras in 2001, and it looked completely different. It looked like, for us, moving into an under-resourced neighborhood, a neighborhood known for its gang violence and being a source of peace, seeking the shalom of that community. But here, it really has been me learning a little bit more about homelessness, learning more about the root of homelessness, learning more of the stories of my friends who are experiencing homelessness. And one of the things that I was most surprised about was that so many of them they also suffer with mental illness. And so sometimes they're not even in their right mind to remember to take their medication, to remember that would help them get to work in time, that would help them be able to pay the bills. And then they end up in this desperate situation because of mental illness. And so I think for me, just learning more about that, having a compassion for that, and entering into, like what you said, Eric, entering into every situation and not bringing my predisposed, ideas of why a person is homeless, not going to the, story that, oh, maybe they're lazy or maybe, they're rebellious or whatever, but really listening to them has helped me be a better peacemaker and seek their peace in really cool, unique, personal ways.
Well, we had Ron Hall on, and Ron is the author of Same Kind of Different as Me, which became an international bestseller, and the movie's coming out in October of a story of a homeless man, an encounter that they had at a Texas homeless shelter. And it became a well-known story. I don't know if you've read it or seen the story, but
I've heard of the story.
Yeah, quite extraordinary. And in our dialogue, we talked about some of the issues regarding homelessness, and that people are, Jesus said, give to the one who asks you. He didn't say if you have an expectation of being paid back. He didn't say if you have this, if you have that. He didn't say any of that. He just said give to the one who asks you. And so I've made it a point myself to give, and I will take their hand and say, do you know the Lord? Can I spend a minute talking to you about this? Can I get you a ride to a shelter? And I've arranged those rides before, where I've provided a taxi to take them to a place so they're off the street. But we tend to, in our middle classness, roll up the window, pull over so that they can't get to us. We see the sign that says we'll work for food, or homeless veteran, and we say, oh, no. They're going to take that money. If I give them $5, they're going to do one of three things with it. They're going to get their next fix. They're going to get some alcohol, or they're going to buy a pack of cigarettes. And I'm just not giving my hard-earned money to somebody that's just going to waste it and perpetuate their situation. No knowledge whatsoever, judgmental, and ready to condemn without any regard whatsoever for the humanity. And this is a part of the problem in America today with perceptions. I think it's underlying theme behind racial perceptions, behind religious perceptions, behind homeless perceptions, behind addiction perceptions, and we don't know the human condition, and we forget, but for the grace of God, there go I.
Yeah, exactly. I also have a podcast, and so on my podcast, I had my friend Alice Colgrove come on because she has a PhD in this. So she has committed her life to studying homelessness, to advocating for those who are experiencing homelessness, and to being a part of the change, like changing in policy, but also their actual everyday lives. And I loved the things that we talked about because it was exactly what you were saying. It was like, get away, move away from our perspectives, move away from our preconceived notions, really focus on humanizing them. She also gave us some really practical things that we can do. So like my kids and I, when we see somebody experiencing homelessness, we think about praying for them. If it's a very hot day, we think, should we stop and get a bottle of water for them? If they have a dog, we're like, oh, do they have enough water or food for their dog? And so what I really loved about that conversation is that she gave me an entry point. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like you said, in our middle classness, we roll up the windows and we think, we come up with all these, excuses as to why we can't enter in, because we can't really figure out an entry point. And so I think that is one of my heart, that's my heart, and one of the things I'm most passionate about is helping people find entry points into creating shalom right where they are, specifically in this conversation that we're talking about homelessness. Yeah.
When we look at what God has redeemed us from, we tend to think that is unique to us and that God can't redeem another person. Or we look at sin as if it's hierarchical, and that there is one sin worse than another sin, and that my sin couldn't possibly be as bad as the sin of this man who just murdered 59 people and wounded 500 and some. But sin is sin. And we tend to pigeonhole God into our definitions and into our structure, and we have a completely opposite. God is trying to fit us into his structure. God is trying to prepare a place for us. He's got a place prepared, and he wants us in this place that he has prepared for us, and we tend to want to have him do our bidding. We tend to want to go to him in time of need, and we don't want to be in this permanent relationship where God is not asking us to do more for him. God is asking us to do more with him.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, and I think that that's one of the reasons why a lot of us feel like we We can't enter into that co-laboring with Christ, that like working with him, is because we're so aware of our own sin, and we have this idea that some sins are worse and some sins are they're smaller, or they have less of an effect, and so I shouldn't worry about them so much. And like you said, a hierarchical view of sin. And so when we're so aware of our own brokenness, it makes us feel like we're inadequate or we are incapable of truly entering in with God and working alongside him and being restored. I like to say we're made whole so that we can make the world whole, but we can't be a part of making the world whole if we don't allow ourselves to be made whole by God and saying, yeah, you've invited me into doing this with you, and I'm just going to bring my whole messy self to you, God, because you're okay with that. You're completely okay with that.
Have you always been someone that was calm, cool, and collected?
Absolutely not. I really think it's funny that you think I'm calm, cool, and collected. My husband would beg to differ. I mean, I guess I've always been somebody that's been intrigued with the idea of peace. I've always been intrigued with the idea of tranquility and living really, tranquility and calm and entering into every moment fully present and none of my, feathers ruffled in that moment. I've always been intrigued by that, and I've always felt like it was this other thing that was either for certain people who have a certain kind of disposition, those who just enter the world very calm, cool, and collected. I'm not that kind of person. And so for me, peace or being a peacemaker just felt like that thing that, well, that's for them. Kind of like what we were saying earlier. Like, some people have that gift, some people have that ability. I just don't. And so, yeah, no, Eric. But that's very kind of you to ask that question.
Well, when you look at yourself in the mirror, who did you see before you embarked on this journey to find peace?
I saw a very earnest person who wanted to get it right. And I think that for me, I had, again, preconceived notions of what peace looked like and preconceived expectations of when I actually have achieved peace or when I'm experiencing peace. This is how I feel. This is how I will feel. These are the thoughts that I will think. These are the good deeds that I'm going to do because I am at peace. And so when I looked at the mirror before, I just saw somebody that just wanted to get it right, and having this sense that there is something bigger and better that I'm just not grasping. And that's why reframing the conversation around peace with the word shalom has really set me free from that sense of striving.
Oftentimes when I counseled, I would ask people, would you rather be right or be happy?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because we're so intent on being right that it robs us of a tremendous amount of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And we come to these crossroads, and it's interesting because Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, speaks the words of God. He says, when you come to the crossroads, choose the ancient path. There you'll find your shalom.
Mm-hmm.
And in that ancient path is always the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's in Deuteronomy 6, when you walk along the way. Jesus says, I am the way. In Hebrew, it's called Haderek, the way. And when you walk along the way, you're walking along the path to God.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the yellow brick road of the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
It's the way. So when did you find your shalom?
I found my shalom when I asked God, when I prayed this very dangerous, kind of very salty prayer, because I was so fed up with striving. I was so fed up with not feeling like we were enough. To give you a little context, like I had done all the things that I thought a peacemaker would do. We were living in an urban neighborhood. We were serving our community. We were doing, as Jeremiah says, seek the peace of the city that I've carried you away to. God carried us to New Orleans, and that's where I was seeking my peace. And I felt so sure that in that moment I was being a peacemaker and I felt at peace. But then, Hurricane Katrina happened and we had to evacuate, and we were in Boston. I was pregnant when Hurricane Katrina happened, and with our second little boy. So I was a new mom. Then I found out I was pregnant again. So I was a mom of 3 kids, 5 and under. And I was sitting around thinking, we're never going to make our way back to New Orleans. And then my husband kind of confirmed that by asking me, what did I think about staying in Boston? And so one night, and it was right before the season of Lent, where I traditionally like to give up something to lay hold of something better. It was Ash Wednesday, and my husband asked me if we could stay, and I was like, I don't know what my life here is going to look like because I don't have an entry point to do the things that we were doing in New Orleans that made me so confident that I was at peace and that I was right where God wanted me to be and I was doing the work of a peacemaker. Because I take Jesus' teachings very seriously about being a peacemaker, and I take his peace teachings so seriously, and I just couldn't find an entry point. And so that night I asked God, I prayed that prayer that Jesus said when he was standing in Jerusalem and he was looking at the city, and he said, if only I could show you the things that make for peace. He was wanting to gather them as a mother hen underneath him. And I was like, Lord, I just want to be gathered underneath. I just want you to show me the things that make for peace, because obviously I don't get it. And then at that point, because Lent is a 40-day time frame, I devoted every day of Lent to studying peace in the Bible, and I found that every instance of peace was linking back to shalom, this Hebrew concept of the world as it should be. God's dream for the world is flourishing and good and vibrant, nothing broken, nothing missing. And that's when I found that shalom gave me that sense of, oh, I can do this. I can be a peacemaker in my everyday life as long as I'm seeking wholeness and flourishing and goodness right where I am. And that's when shalom became active and alive for me. That's when that ancient concept became very relevant for me. Just even in this moment, I've noticed ways that I can practice shalom just as a stay-at-home mom, sitting here having a conversation with you. So that's really where I found my shalom over the course of those 40 days of peace.
It's interesting because 40 is the number of testing in the Bible. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Goliath tested the Israelites for 40 days. Jesus was taken out in the desert for 40 days. There's so many 40s in the Bible. It was 40 years in the wilderness. 40 plays such an important number. And we look at this traditional celebration of Lent, 40 days, but it is a time of testing, it's a time of refinement. What happens during that time is that, and I've used this picture before, that God can be like sandpaper, and we can be like a rough piece of wood, and when the sandpaper hits to the high places, it hurts. And we tend to pull away because it hurts. But if we just stay close, the friction, yes, it gets hot, it certainly does get hot, but over time, that friction produces something that we like because it's beautiful and shiny. And when we look at God, he goes from being an abrasive piece of sandpaper to a polishing cloth, because not only does it change us, but the contact changes our relationship with him. We become more refined, and he becomes the refiner.
Yes.
And when we do that, we don't pull away in the difficult situation. When we do that, we begin to find our peace, and we call Jesus Prince of Peace, our Shalom.
Yes.
We talk about that peace that passes all understanding, and we use it like it's just a trite saying that has no depth of meaning. But Shalom is that peace that passes all understanding. It is a rest, a respite. It is a drink of water in a parched land. It is the garden blooming with the wildflowers in the month of May across a desert in Israel. The desert, and then poof, about May the 15th, May the 20th, all of a sudden it's alive with fields of wildflowers, things that you thought there was weeds growing up, and all of a sudden this blast of color. Doesn't last that long, but it's so amazing how God takes these cans of paint and throws us across the desert, and it becomes beautiful. And you stand there and you look and says, if he can turn the desert into this garden, what can he do for me in my dry places? If I just let him water me and nourish me, then I'll flourish like the desert flower flourishes. You evacuated from Katrina.
Yes.
A week after you evacuated from Katrina, you were sharing a queen-sized bed in your godparents' home in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You thought you would go back.
Yes.
And you got news that there was no going back.
There's no going back. Yeah, my husband and I actually, little funny story, the year before when Hurricane Ivan came through, it came through and it didn't do very much damage. I think actually when it made landfall, it had downgraded to a tropical storm. And we had evacuated to Southeast Texas because that's where I'm from. And that was a terrible experience for all of us. And so we almost didn't evacuate. And even as we were evacuating, we had this mindset that, oh, we're just going to go and we're going to, visit my family. Like I said, I was 8 months pregnant, so I was going to have our baby soon. So I thought, well, this will be fun. My parents get to see me one last time. Maybe I might even have the baby in Texas and I'll get to spend time with my baby. And then we'll go back to our work in New Orleans. But then, like you said, a week or two after the storm made landfall, we heard from our landlord, who was also the director of the community center where my husband worked, that they weren't even letting residents back into the city for weeks, maybe months. And we didn't have weeks, maybe months. I was going to have a baby in 4 weeks. And that's really when we had to reevaluate and figure out what's next for us.
So, did you have insurance? Were you able to or you just lost everything?
We lost everything. We were a young ministry couple, and so one of the things as a pastor's wife, I like to make sure, because I'm very practical and I love to plan. I'm like, do you have everything you need? For young ministry couples, do you have savings? Do you have renter's insurance? Because those were things that we didn't think about, and so we lost everything. But thankfully, we had the help of our church. We had the help of our community that was not affected by the storm, and then we received some help from FEMA to sort of give us the resources we need to be able to make a decision for what's next. And that's when we decided to move to Boston so my husband could pursue his master's in seminary.
You open up the chapter on 40 Days of Peace with a quote from Brian Zahnd. He's been a guest on our program. And, such an interesting character.
He is.
An interesting character, and you quote, "The kingdom of God is an alternative arrangement of human society around Jesus, which leads to human flourishing." And this is entitled 40 Days of Peace. So you talked about this season of Lent, and I love what you said, and say it again. I gave up something so that I gave up something that I was holding on to so that I can grab onto something better. So the idea of Lent is this thing that maybe you're getting your sense of identity from, or this small thing in your life that you're really enjoying, but you're letting it go for a season so that you can grab onto something better that gives you a lasting enjoyment, a lasting sense of identity, a lasting rest. So I like to say I give up something small so I can hold on to something greater. Yeah, it's the best example I've ever heard. It's the best explanation. I never really understood, I'm Jewish, I never really understood this. It's nowhere in the Bible. So I'm trying to think of what does this exemplify? What is the purpose of this? To give up something, okay.
Yeah, it seems kind of arbitrary.
Yeah, but for what purpose? And when does the 40 days start? And and then you come into this, the 40 days ends, but it doesn't end on a specific, it's still 10 days until something's going to happen. And so I've been rather confused by it, and because I don't study church tradition. I came out of traditional Judaism. I came to faith in a synagogue, Messianic synagogue, and so I've served in the Messianic community for all these years. Just church doctrines and principles and traditions are somewhat of a mystery to me still. If people ask me about Calvin, I say I wear Levi Calvin's too tight. So, so
that's a really good example. That's a really good response. Maybe I should start using that and avoid some, online debates.
Yeah, am I a Calvinist? No, I'm a Leviist. It's just more comfortable for me. So this is a fun conversation. What we're going to do is when we return from the break, I want you to share the Shalom Sistas Manifesto.
Okay, I would love to. Thank you.
We're talking with Osheta Moore, author of Shalom Sistas. Sistas, I got to get it right, and I got to get the emphasis on the last syllable, because and you got to put a little
shimmy and shake into it.
Yes, I have to have a little attitude
You
there.
got to have an attitude. Shalom Sistas. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with Osheta Moore. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're visiting with Osheta Moore, author of Shalom Sistas. Osheta, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
I'm glad to have you. You created or wrote or authored or birthed the Shalom Sistas Manifesto. And
Yes.
this came out of really as an outcropping of an encounter you had at Starbucks.
It did.
Tell us about that meeting and then what came out of that.
Yes. So this was at a Starbucks date with a very good friend of mine, an older mentor of mine, who wanted to see us off because my husband had just accepted the job a job in LA. So this was back in Boston. And we were together, and she was telling me all the things that she loved about LA because she got her master's at Fuller, and she was just saying how grateful she has been for our friendship. And then she said, "Well, I want to talk to you about something you wrote." And I said, "Oh, okay." And she said, "You wrote this piece, and it was a piece about just finding a way to live out shalom, like right where I am in my everyday life, just really wanting to connect those pieces together." And I said something about, following Jesus as my Prince of Peace in this alternative way of living, and really like finding ways to make my everyday experience matter and finding ways for shalom and to enter into that. And she said, "You figured it out." And I said, "What are you talking about? Like, I haven't figured anything out." And she said, so you figured out that it's bigger than these broad theological ideas or these concepts that we like to talk about back and forth. You figured out that there's a practical way to enter into that. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm glad that she got that from that post, because for me, that post was really saying, I want to figure this out. Like, I know, like, I can sense that Shalom has really, thinking about peace through the lens of Shalom, thinking about my life through the lens of Shalom, has really changed the way that I engage with the world. But I just, it's kind of like when you sense something before you truly understand it. I sensed that I was living it out in my everyday life, but I didn't have the right words around it. So when she encouraged me and said, I figured the pieces out, that there's a practical element to it, like a hands and feet part of it, I felt like it was a great compliment, but I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to actually think through, why do I do the things that I do? What are the things that I think before I practice shalom in certain situations, and synthesize it and put it in, sort of 12 things that I think through. I had this sense that when I practice shalom, I'm thinking about wholeness in 4 different directions. I think about wholeness and within my relationship with God. Am I feeling connected and truly in touch with Him? And am I sensing His love in a really real way right now? I think about it within myself. What are the things that I feel broken about, and the things that I'm constantly struggling with within my own self and my body and my mind? I think about peacemaking or shalom in my relationships with the people in my life, and then in systems in the world. And I had this sense that I was thinking this way naturally, but I didn't have that language. So when we got to LA, which was really fun for my kids, by the way, because we left Boston in February, and they were bundled up and wearing snow boots, and then we got to LA and it was warm enough for them to swim in our pool. I was sitting by the pool and I was like, God, help me figure out how to take all the things I learned during the 40 days of peace, take all the ways that I applied it after the years following my 40 days of peace, and how do I, again, synthesize it and put it into, 12 things that I can tell myself, so that when I do enter into a situation, I can reference back, this is my manifesto point for this moment. This is how I can be a peacemaker right now in my everyday life.
Wow. So the Shalom Sistas Manifesto are 12 specific, really platform pieces that you established.
Yeah.
And what are they?
Yeah, so they're just 12 truths that I tell myself, and there's 3 for each of those 4 directions that I mentioned. The first one, when I think about shalom within my relationship with God, I like to first think I'm invited. So I am invited, meaning God has asked me, like we were saying earlier, to come alongside Him, to be with Him. It also has a lot to do with the way that I look at God. Like, what is my picture of God? Do I picture Him as loving, or do I picture Him as angry, or do I picture Him as welcoming, or do I picture Him as judging? And so when I say I'm invited, I'm reminding myself of who God is, His true character, and that He wants me alongside with Him. When I say I am beloved, it's just reminding myself of my belovedness and thinking back to when Jesus was baptized and the Father said, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased, this in whom I in my love, this is my beloved." And I think of the Holy Spirit, and I think of also like I'm beloved without having to do anything. Just like Jesus was beloved before God proclaimed his belovedness before he started his ministry. And so when I say I'm beloved, it's not, I'm reminding myself that my worth is not tied to the things I do. I am enough. So I don't have to prove myself. God already says I'm enough. I think for women, a lot we struggle with imposterism. We struggle with having to prove our worth. And so I remind myself that God thinks I'm enough. When I think about within myself, I think about I will see the beauty, and that has to do with the beauty that God made me as an image bearer. So I see myself first as an image bearer and not judge my sense of beauty by what the world says. Also, that I remember that that there's beauty in the world, especially in times like now when we're really grieving the loss of life from Las Vegas, when we're thinking about the violence and how horrific it was. It's very tempting for us to forget that there's actual beauty in the world too. So I remind myself I will see the beauty. I will rest, which is Sabbath, making sure I take time for myself and create, and then also creating rest for those on the margins, like we were talking about earlier when we were talking about homelessness. And I will choose subversive joy. And this is basically similar to beauty in that I will look for ways to experience and express the joy of the kingdom of God right here on earth. Within our relationships, I think about telling better stories. And so this is really where we were talking about again with homelessness. When I look at somebody who's homeless, I will choose to tell a better story about them. I will say, they didn't end up in this place by themselves or without any backstory, without anything contributing. So I will enter in telling a story that they're image bearers. I will enter in telling a story that that accesses my compassion for them. I will serve before I speak is all about humility. And so it's how do I help those that I love in a way that doesn't hurt them? How do I enter into situations of being, bringing resources, but not bringing it as a sense of like, I'm going to fix you, but bringing my resources and say, how can I help you right where you are? And then we'll build bridges, not walls. It's all about us learning to have respectful, honest, kind dialogue with people who are different than us. And then the last way that I think about practicing shalom is shalom in the world or in broken systems in the world. So we will choose ordinary acts of peace. And this is really just in line with Luke 16:10, when Jesus says, if you can be trusted with very little, then I can trust you with much. So it's this idea that we want to be a part of changing big systems, but we need to be practicing peace in our everyday lives in small ways so that when those big opportunities come, we're not scared or we're not, hiding in that sense of like, oh, like we were talking about earlier, Eric, I'm inadequate. I can't do this. I can't partner alongside with God. The next one is we will show up, say something, be still. This is all about standing in solidarity with those who are hurting. And the last one is we will be peacemakers and not peacekeepers. So I like to think about the difference between that is peacemakers seek to create shalom out of love for others, love for the world, out of overflow of love that God has placed in them because they experience their own belovedness. Peacekeepers have this sense of trying to make everything very calm, make everything very right, and access that place of tranquility because they're so afraid of conflict. And so it's this idea of like making sure everything works the way it should out of a sense of anxiety and not because you really love the people who are involved in that. And so that's those are the sort of 12 different ways that when I interact in the world, I'm thinking through like, okay, I will tell better stories when somebody in the carpool lane, yells at me, which is actually something that happened. And I write about that in the book. Or, I will serve before I speak when I have this sense of like, oh, I have the answer, but I don't quite understand the people who are involved in that. So I'll serve them by learning more first. And then if my answer makes sense at that point, then I offer that as a service to them.
What was the hardest peace lesson, shalom lesson for you?
I would say the hardest one, and the one that I am still working through on a regular basis, is building bridges and not walls. Because I think I'm a smart person. I think I've done my research. I think over my years of ministry, I've experienced, different types of relationships so I can read people. So I have a very, I'm confident in my abilities, and that confidence can become my downfall because in that confidence, so my confidence is building, is a part, it creates the bricks that build this wall. And so because I'm so confident, I build up a wall and I say, I don't have to learn about this person's experience, or I don't have to listen to why they disagree with me, because I've done my research and I know 1,000 other people like them. And so I don't let them in. And so one of the things that I am actively working on is being somebody that breaks down that wall and says and accesses humility in my relationships with people, that say, I could learn something from this group of people. I may disagree with you about all these things, but this one thing we do agree on. So let me be that entry point. Let that be the construction of a bridge and not the building up of a wall.
When it came to the part about identity,
Mm-hmm.
and you talked about this brown skin, we will see the beauty.
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously across the nation an increasing sensitivity towards a racial divide.
Mm-hmm.
People are beginning to advance, in my opinion, a racist narrative that has become divisive as opposed to unifying.
Mm-hmm.
That it's on both sides of the aisle, and it's driving a wedge into communities that don't have, and I've spoken about racism in the church. I think that there is an underlying racial divide, but there's also a difficulty in relating to various social institutions within a cultural community that the construct of the church is not necessarily designed to meet. I actually was very upset back in the October time frame at one of the presidential debates when the concept of the black church was introduced, and I didn't understand it. So I went to leaders in the black community here in Birmingham to say, what is this? Is this birthed out of racism, or is this birthed out of a church which is designed to meet the needs of a specific community? And they said it's clearly designed to meet the needs of a specific community, because a traditional white Anglo-Saxon Protestant church cannot identify or relate and will not locate within the construct of the inner city to meet the needs or have any compassion. Or they can have compassion, but they have no empathy. They cannot have understanding because they have not experienced it. And so I began to understand the role of what we would call the black church. Now, that is a certain community and a certain construct. But when we get outside that community, then we look at the construct of society, of Christianity, of the church, and we find that it's still divided, that there's still a lack of any kind of ethnic assimilation, if you will, or racial assimilation where there's complete acceptance across the aisle that a church would be mostly this or mostly that, as opposed to it being what it was in Acts chapter 2. It was Jewish people that had been scattered to the nations, gathered back together, and they were speaking different languages, and they had different facial features. The Asian Jews looked Asian. The African American Jews, the African Jews looked African. The Ethiopian Jews, even today, 6'4", dark skin, no different a Jew than I am, and I look Eastern European, where my people are from. Their people are from Ethiopia. A Rhodesian Jew looks Rhodesian. A Chinese Jew looks Chinese. We're ethnically, we're racially Jewish, but we're ethnically or culturally or sociologically a dual identity, if you will, where it's not even a hyphenated. It's a Chinese Jew, not a Chinese hyphen Jew, but in Kaifeng, China, there is a community, a Jewish community of Kaifeng Jews, and they all look Chinese. If I were to go there, they would say to me, funny, I don't look Jewish, because their construct of Jewish is Chinese. So we see this in the world, and in your manifesto, this brown skin, I like the fact that it is addressed. I like the fact that you bring self-awareness. You and I look different from the outside.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
look any different on the inside.
Yeah.
We don't have, we're created by the same creator.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
hearts do you have?
One.
And lungs?
One, right? But two chambers, right?
No, two lungs. Two lungs.
Yes.
Yeah, two lungs.
Anatomy is not my
Two
strong
lungs.
point.
Two lungs. Well, you really are different than me.
I don't know.
So, you know, we see in the story of God going to select a king to replace Saul, and in Samuel it says that man looks on the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. If
Yes.
we are to be more God-like, Osheta, are we not supposed to look at each other's hearts and stop being walking by sight and start walking by faith? All these scriptures have to do with our carnal, our fleshly encounters, and not looking at the invisible parts, which are invisible unless I try to see a spiritual connection with you,
Yeah.
a different kind of connection. How did you decide to bring this to bear in this Shalom picture?
Well, you know, our faith is an embodied faith. I mean, I like I said, I really take my cues from Jesus. You know, when Brian Zahn talked about an alternative kingdom, an alternative way of shaping society around the kingdom of God, you know, I looked at Jesus and he was my example of living a life that reflects the kingdom of God, of living an alternative way. And so, but that was an embodied experience, right? Like Jesus was an actual human being. He was a Jewish man. And so for me to separate my practices of shalom, for me to separate my rest and my identity as a child of God from this body, from this brown skin, is disingenuous. And it actually doesn't serve me well, because if I can separate it, if I can say, you know, my body is separate from my heart or from my spirit, then I don't have any desire to actively seek peace right in my everyday life, because I've bifurcated it. And so in order for me to live wholeheartedly in this brokenhearted world, for me to bring my whole self to this book, I had to address the fact that I am in this body, that, like you said, in America, there's a lot of conflict around, there's a lot of hard conversations around. The social construct has placed this body that I have at the very bottom. I feel vulnerable in my body, and yet, I'm still an image bearer of God. And so then what does that mean for me to say, I see the beauty in this body, even though others don't, and I see the beauty in embodying my faith in this body, and finding entry points that this body allows me to have, like a conversation with you around this. How do I say I value that? Then how do I also be wholehearted and say, but God, I struggle sometimes with seeing the beauty in that. And so that's what that chapter is all about. It's just me saying, you know, I'm sitting in this space where I want to only focus on my heart and my spirit, because those are easy, those are fun. There's lots of scriptures about that. But then I look at Jesus, and he embodied living out this alternative way. And so I've got to reconcile those fears. I've got to make peace. I've got to find shalom in this brown skin.
Do you find that when you find your shalom, that you are now tasked with a greater call on your life to spread the message of shalom?
Yes, but I also feel incredibly motivated, and I feel like the stakes are, it's kind of odd, Eric. The stakes feel a little bit lower, because I know that shalom is God's dream, and I know that shalom, the Holy Spirit is eager to help me create shalom right where I am. It doesn't all rest on me. And so when I was thinking about being a peacemaker and thinking about creating peace, I was truly just a peacekeeper, and that anxiety was like weighing me down. But then I started thinking about shalom and being like, oh my gosh, this was God's idea from the beginning, and he's invited me into doing this, and he's going to be right alongside me, and so I can just take the pressure off and just be my real self. Yeah, it makes me want to live it out in my everyday life. I feel the desire and the eagerness for that to be my calling, and not so much the pressure of getting it right.
So when you find real peace, it's not because you found perfection.
No. No, I don't think shalom is perfection. I think shalom is truly being partnered with God, really walking alongside God. I like to say for us to have good theology, we need to go back to the very beginning. And so when we go back and we look at Eden, we look at the flourishing there, like you were talking about with the desert flowers. We look at the vibrancy there. We look at the hope, the newness of the garden. And we also look at the intimacy that we had with God, that closeness, that sense that we are truly beloved and that He made us in His image. I don't think Adam and Eve before the fall ever questioned whether their bodies were beautiful. They walked around naked and unashamed because God created them and He invited them to partner with Him. And so to be a Shalom sister, to be a Shalom practitioner is to be somebody that says, God has invited me, I'm partnering with Him, and I want to be a part of Him bringing the world back to wholeness, bringing the world back to that sense of Eden.
Now at the end of the book, you offer up shalom steps and shalom recipes. What are those?
Yeah, so like I was saying earlier, this is an embodied faith, and I really get so irritated when I sit in an amazing service and listen to this awesome preacher, and he's just really speaking truth to me, and I understand the word, but then I don't know how to live it out in my life. And I think that's why we gather on Sunday, is so that we can, yes, be reminded that we're an alternative community, yes, be encouraged and learn more from the word, but then actually be sent out with some practical next steps. So the Shalom steps are practical next steps for each one of the manifesto points. So I have things in there like, when we were talking about seeing the beauty, I have things in there like going on a walk with a friend and talking about your own struggles with your body or your own concerns about racism, and then saying the beauty that you see in each other's bodies, and then, calling out the beauty in creation, sort of a way of being all holistic. So those are the Shalom steps, and those are my favorite thing to write, because I truly feel like the church needs more voices that connect great theology, great orthodoxy with really great orthopraxy. And then the Shalom recipes are, I'm an optimistic cookbook reader. I read cookbooks for fun, but I don't think I'm going to make the most perfect risotto. So I also deeply feel like all of us are so different. We bring our different personalities, we bring our different experiences to our Shalom practices, in the same way that when we read a recipe, we bring our taste palettes and our family's preferences and all that. So the Shalom recipes are a few recipes that I have, that I've made in our family, that have a ton of different ways that you can make them, that you can just bring whatever you love, whatever you have on hand. But it's a way for us to, again, embody this idea that we are to be people who create peace and flourishing right where we are.
Well, I love that. Tell me, as we get ready to close, one of the things you mentioned, and I'm not familiar with the term, of a Sankofa journey. Is this like a Emmaus walk?
Yes, yeah, it's a little bit like that. Sankofa is an African word. I forget. I think it's West African for going back in order to go forward. And so the denomination that my husband is a pastor through is the Evangelical Covenant Church, and so they are known for. It's Twi. I just looked it up. So it's from Ghana. It's a Sankofa. Sankofa is a word from the Twi language, which Ghana, which means go back and get it. So the idea of go back, learn what you can, and then go forward so that you can create flourishing or a better future. And so when I did the Sankofa journey, it was particularly around race. So the Covenant does these journeys. We start at the very bottom of the Underground Railroad, and we make our way up to Canada. This instance, it's a 3-day trip, and so we started in Missouri, and we went through and made our way to Ferguson, where Mike Brown was shot, and where there's been that was sort of the beginning of this ongoing conversation in our country around racism and police and the value of Black lives in America. So I went on that journey because it was important for me to go back to learn what has racism done to our country from the beginning, and how has it contributed to our experience now. In the same way, when I did my 40 days of peace, like you were saying earlier, go the ancient way, I made my way back and tried to understand from the very beginning, what was Shalom and what does it mean, and what does it mean for me now in my everyday life, so I can create a future of flourishing.
Well, I think it's a great message. We've been talking with Osheta Moore, author of Shalom Sistas, Living Wholeheartedly in a Broken-Hearted World. I talk to many people that have no shalom. They're agitated, irritated, anxious, worried, fearful about what will happen. Their lives have been rocked by so many instances of violence, natural disasters, uncertainty, times of difficulty. But yet God has a plan of peace. He sent the Prince of Peace, the one who would then leave to intercede for us and send the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. That a relationship of closeness to the Holy One of Israel, to the throne of grace, will bring you great peace. Would you like to put your head on the pillow and sleep comfortably because you take no worry to your bed? Would you like to wake up in the morning refreshed without fear, anxiety, and worry about what the day will hold for you? The secrets are contained within this book, Living Wholeheartedly in a Broken World, Shalom Sistas. If you don't have shalom, this is a recipe for you. I strongly encourage you to get a copy of Shalom Sistas, Living Wholeheartedly in a Broken-Hearted World. Osheta Moore, thank you so much for sharing this great book with us, and especially today, the day of its release. God bless you, and may the Lord bless all the works of your hand.
Thank you, Eric. You too. Shalom.
Shalom.